Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
Hey, this is Bob Bender, and you're tuned in to this episode of the business side of music. Once again, we got in the studio partner in crime. I like to keep calling him Mr. Vinny Rebus. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
Always good to have you on as a co-host. Gives my my voice a little bit of rest, as my wife says I talk a lot.
I feel like the Ed McMahon of the series. So you take 90% of it, and I'll just chime in here and there and add those little nuggets of wisdom.
Well, with that being said, I want to know what's in your coffee cup over there. Today, we have the distinct honor and opportunity. Steve Creech is in the studio with us. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Bob. Good morning, Vinny.
Steve has spent most of his life in the professional music industry and recording arts. As a respected and seasoned producer, engineer, and mastering engineer, he has contributed his considerable experience and hard-earned skills on literally thousands of successful audio projects. Such artists as Stephen Curtis Chapman, Dave Loggins, one of my favorites, Buddy Guy, Dr. Dre, we'll have to talk about that one, and John Sebastian, just to name a few. Is a multi-instrumentalist and has performed on countless recordings in all genres of music. As a performer, he has toured extensively in the U.S. When he was a recording and audio mastering instructor at Ohio State University, Steve enjoyed sharing his knowledge because of his passion for students and learning. Steve still works with beginning and intermediate artists of all kinds to refine the craft and help them achieve their audio musical goals. As an award-winning composer, songwriter, Steve has written custom compositions for numerous clients, such as McDonald's, IBM, United Way, Cummins Engine, Disciples of Christ, and various advertising agencies. Steve's work has been placed in feature films, and he has scored original background music for commercial videos. He's also contributed Foley and sound design not only to feature films, but to television, radio, and music videos. Steve is currently owner and operator of Sound Investment Recording, utilizing studios in both Nashville, Tennessee, and his own state-of-the-art recording facility in Indianapolis, Indiana. He's a member in good standing with the Audio Engineering Society, also the Nashville Songwriters Association International, and Nashville Music Pros. Steve, there you go. Wow. Show's all yours.
You know, I would sign that guy up.
Well, we have. Here's the contract.
I don't remember half of that.
It's about 45 pages, but yeah.
And you only have to pay us about, no.
Yeah.
So much a word, right? Yeah.
So, first question is, how did you get started in the business? Would you just start out as a musician, or?
Yeah, my ambition at the time, when I was high school anyway, was to become an electrical engineer, design things.
Okay.
And so I just assumed that was what I was going to do the 30 years back in the day, get the watch and retire and that sort of thing, and just be a geeky guy. But I was playing on weekends with bands to make money for the family and stuff, and I just kind of stayed with it. Went to work for RCA. That was a good adventure and good proving ground. So yeah, I had a musical background and stage and performance.
What were your instruments of choice?
Well, some of those were not two choice instruments. They were kind of cheap. You know how it is when you're starting out.
Yeah.
I started out as a drummer, and Vinny, of course, I know to be a good drummer. And I did that and gravitated to guitars and started doing arrangements and studies and eventually to keyboards and other stringed instruments. And so it was a musical adventure originally.
So what got you into the audio end of things, producing and engineering?
Well, I took a left turn, like a lot of us do. It was one of those deals where I was intrigued with the electronic side of things, and I was intrigued with the musical aspects of it. In Indianapolis, I became known for being kind of a hired gun, going to the studios and playing on sessions and things for other people, and I was always intrigued with it. And I think the turning point was I was in a band, and we had rehearsed like most kids do, and we went into the studio, and we rushed through the session, and I guess I can say this, but everybody in the band but me was high at the time, and that does affect the way you hear things, I guess. And so we went
and the way you play them too.
Yeah, I imagine
absolutely, sure.
So we went into the studio. I shouldn't probably mention the name, but it was a nice studio, and we booked X amount of time. And what I remember about it was we rushed through that time tracking, and then all of a sudden, the leader of the group turned to the engineer, a nice fellow named Mark Copenhaver, which I know now, has worked a lot with Gaithers and stuff like that, and said, "Okay, mix it real quick."
Oh.
You know? And I thought, well, that doesn't seem like a very logical thing to do. That seems like that's an important job.
Because the clock is ticking, he's wanting to...
Right.
Yeah.
He's just trying to accelerate things.
Every dollar counts.
So I watched what happened, and it was a turning point in my mentality because we had this creeping mix. So the bass player would say, "Oh, I need more bass." And then the drummer would say, "Well, I need more kick drum." And then the guitar player, "Well, I need to be more guitar." And it was the egos coming out. And I knew these people, and I was kind of intrigued to watch it. And it was a train wreck. And then we made a dub of it. We went back to this guy's house to listen to it. And they played it, and everybody got real salty about it and saying, "Oh, that sounds terrible. Oh, my goodness, that's just awful. You know, they screwed us over. We're going to sue that studio, right, Creech? Right, Creech?" And, you know, you got to pick a side. And I said, "No, fellas, we did that. You know, I see what happened." But that was kind of cool, you know, the big board, the big microphones. I wonder how that stuff works. So that clicked, and the next thing you know, I was studying that stuff.
That's interesting because that's you know, I started out as a musician too, but when I got into the studio aspects of things, even with live touring, it was just kind of the bells and the whistles and the buttons and the knobs and the lights on the consoles that you go, okay, I want to know what that does, and I'm going to figure out a way to do it. And of course, back in those days, you didn't have the schools that we have now. You know, it was pretty much the University of Hard Knocks. Was that how it was for you?
Yeah. Just coming up and learning a lot on my own.
What does this button do, and figuring it out?
Well, I'm an insanely curious guy. You know, for instance, I like history. I like rock and roll history. I like pop and country history and where people come from. It's not a vacuum. And so, for instance, you know, if you can trace an instrument like a guitar back to many people over the years that it's evolved, but there's really only one inventor of the piano, a guy named Bartolomeo, I think that's how you say it. It's an Italian name, Vinny, Cristofori. And he solely created the piano from his own vision, you know. And so in classical music, you know, you hear these themes and then you hear them repeated again and again and again. Last night, I was watching a little bit of a movie, and they had the second movement of Beethoven's Eighth Sonata. And I was listening to it, and I'm thinking, oh, you know what? That riff right there, that little 6-note segment, cadence, is part of this pop song. And I went over to the guitar and started playing it. Yeah, except for one note exception.
Right.
So, you know, everything's derivative. And
yeah, there's only so many notes, so many chords, and it's just how they're structured.
Exactly. Yeah. So those combinations, I look for the subtleties in the recordings and the way that people put them together. Yeah.
I have to say, I mean, I've known Steve for 10 years now or so, and I don't know anyone who's got the ears that he has when it comes to this kind of stuff, so he can pick so many of those little things out. So I can just picture him in the studio when they're doing this terrible mix and rushing through it, and his ears are just bleeding from that.
Yeah.
We've all been in those sessions.
Sure.
Yeah. This is Bob Bender, and you're listening to this edition of The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Bob Bender, president of Bob Bender Productions. Since 1987, our company has provided consultation and artist direction services for recording industry artists. If you're looking to take your music career to the next level, or simply need advice on jump-starting a project or marketing one that's been completed, then we're here to assist you with over 40 years of experience in the entertainment business. We offer individual or group sessions, in person, or over the phone or Skype consultations. Feel free to call our office at 888-326-1140 or email us at info@bobbenderproductions.com for more details.
You're listening to the business side of music.
So we're here in the studio with Vinny Rebus, my co-host and co-producer on the show, and Steve Creech. Got to ask you, looking at your bio and seeing the different artists you worked with, it's a little diversity there, jumping, from Stephen Curtis Chapman to Dr. Dre. Mm-hmm. Are these just like really cool chance opportunities that came into your life, or was it people you knew, connections? How'd those all work out?
No, my first wife, of many, just kidding. My first wife's a lovely lady. She managed the Indianapolis Convention and Visitors Association, and she was friends with the Gaithers, and this is an Indianapolis area,
right,
in the Midwest. So, gosh, I'm not even sure how to answer that. I had a job opportunity in Nashville, and was going to move here, and then she got her job, and we decided that. We decided that she was going to be happy. So good for that. And so we decided to stay in Indianapolis, and that's where we had our son. And opportunities is a great sports town, and I love Indy, but there's not a whole lot of culture and music for what I do and / technical stuff. And so, and I'd been coming down to Nashville to do recordings and produce records or do some mastering, but I didn't know a whole lot about mastering at the time. This is in the late 80s, and I figured that I would kind of find engineers that I felt a kinship with, and they had great ears and good mixes, and I saw this one thing on a multi-image bit, and I found this guy, and I said, so, I've heard good things about you, and he said, I know who you are, and blah, 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 and we shook hands, and he says, have you ever done any commercial mastering? And I said, I don't even know if I know what that is, really. I mean, I think I know what this is. It's kind of voodoo, black art.
Yeah.
So, and it was a startup company.
But give me 5 minutes and I'll figure it out.
Well, I'm curious, right?
Yeah.
So I started working for this company, and they were based out of California, but they had a satellite there, and they had all these cool contracts. And I have to admit that I was slammed right from the very beginning, 60, 80, 90 hours a week, and was exposed to a lot of things. And I started thinking, in my world, referential mastering was much more important than absolute mastering. We can touch on that if you want. But we started getting these contracts and these people, and I would take the refs home with me, and I'd be playing them on the stereo at home while she's cooking dinner, and Patty would say, oh, that sounds just like Kenny Loggins. And I said, well, that is Kenny Loggins. And she goes, oh, do you know him? And I go, no, not really. I mean, I'm just working on this. To me, it was a separation, the work and the people. Like, I don't know if you noticed or not when you pulled up, but there's a black Toyota Cruiser out in front of the studio. Belongs to Tim McGraw.
Oh.
Yeah, and he's getting it worked on out back of the studio here. I'm more impressed with that. Think, oh, that's what he drives, huh? Okay. Some people are into that. I don't know if I answered your question adequately or not, but I had some exposure to these people, usually on the post side.
So you're saying that the company that you worked for had the contracts, and you just worked on all of these major projects.
And that's a lot of it. It was a great proving ground, good ear training. I went into the owner of the company after I'd been there for a few years. By this time, they'd won some Doves and some Grammys and stuff like that, and I was just a hired hand, but they kept telling me I was the ears of the company. And so I went to him.
That's a nice bargaining chip when...
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I was ready to walk.
Yeah.
I walked in with a list, and it had 200 CDs on it, right? And he says, what's this? And I said, I need you to buy me these CDs. And he said, well, I'm not doing that. No way. And I said, I need them. And he says, why? And I said, because I'm on the phone, and I'm talking to somebody in, Germany or something, and they're talking about the Gregorian chants, or they're talking about some death metal record, or they talking about some bluegrass stuff. And I said, I want to have these things in my repertoire. I'm a musician, so I know what an instrument sounds like in the real world. But I wanted to have access to these high-tech recordings best I could get at the time.
Right.
And I'd pop them in and I'd say, this is you and this is the world. And that's when I started building mastering rooms too. I've built 5 so far for myself, for other people mostly. This one here in Nashville is the first one I've really built from myself from the ground up. That's why I was real proud of it, you know.
Let's talk about a minute. You talked about 2 different forms of mastering, referential and absolute. So let's talk about the difference of those.
Well, I told the kids, and I sort of believe this. I had a student when I was at Ohio State teaching, and he stood up in front of the whole class, and he said, "Mr. Creech, I've checked you out. You seem legit." I go, "Oh, gee, thanks. I am teaching the class." And
do you want a credit reference too while we're at it?
You want to see my PIN number on my credit card? And he says, "I want you to teach me the tricks of the trade." And I said, "I'm not here for that. I'm here to teach you the trade."
Yeah.
And you come up with your own tricks, because like you said earlier, there's a lot of schools weren't available back then. So it was fairly new. And the referential thing was something I used to refer to, because you've got guys who sit in this finely tuned control room, and everything is, the acoustics are very important, your perception of things, right? Your reproduction system and how you hear, and it's all interactive and subjective, and loudness versus volume and frequency versus time domains, things like that. And so I was always very conscious of it, and having those referential recordings keeps you honest, and so people would mix things and they wouldn't. I said, who is this supposed to be? Oh, it's kind of like Tom Petty meets Doc Watson. And you go, okay, well, did you have any references when you were mixing it? Because the better the mix, the better the master.
Right.
And they would say, no, we just kind of mixed it on our own and listened to it in the car. And, so you got guys in the ivory tower in these finely tuned control rooms that they know. And they sit there day in and day out. And they're in a little cocoon. And they know that room extremely well. And they know those monitors very, very well. And they can make educated decisions and they hold up.
Based on that perfect, almost sterile environment.
Right.
Yeah. But that's not the real world.
No. And like you made a very astute observation, how the industry has changed dramatically, where people are working in their bedrooms, and their rooms, might be an 8-foot ceiling, and it's an 8x10 bedroom, and you can't really treat that room adequately to make those critical decisions. So you turn it over to a guy like me. I was always shocked that this company would hand me a Phil Kagi record, or somebody like that, and it'd be on DAT tapes or open reels or whatever back in the day, and they don't know me, but they trust the company. So all of a sudden it hit me one day about 2 o'clock in the morning that, oh my goodness, I'm the last line of defense before this goes to the street for evaluation. I better make this good, or best I can.
A buddy of mine, his dad, Ray Edenton, his dad was known as the one of the best session players in Nashville. He had recorded on over 15,000 projects, everybody from Patsy Cline to Elvis Presley to the Beach Boys. And he always told the story about they were in the studio one night with Brian Wilson here in Nashville. And Brian was, for whatever reason, was really putting his thumb down on the bass player. And he, said, "I want you to do this again. I want you to do this again." And the bass player kept saying, "Well, isn't this good enough? Just keep doing it again. Keep doing it." Well, anyway, long story short, the bass player finally asked Brian, he goes, "Why do you have me keep doing this over and over and over?" And Brian said, 100 years from now, that music's going to be out there and it can't be changed.
Yeah.
And the bass player said, "Let's do it again." So that's when you're in the studio, that's it. Once it gets out into that, in the old days, it used to get out into the bricks and mortar stores, but now that it gets out on the internet or Spotify or Pandora, you can't control the dynamics. It's out there forever.
Yeah, that's right. Back in 1990, through a mutual friend, I got to meet Paul McCartney, and even though it was a short encounter, I had that sense of, mortality, thinking, okay, he's a long-termer, he has a career, like a lot of the folks that nowadays we're, we're not sure with everything in the state of flux in the music industry if those kind of careers are sustainable anymore, you know. And but I look at people like Brian Wilson, and they're still all my heroes. You know, I have many heroes like you do. So
I think also that we talked about the music business. You know, it has changed, and it's something we'll touch on another episode down the road. But music has almost, and I think it was Reggie Ham that said it's a famous songwriter, that music has really become the loss leader for T-shirts and photos. You know, it's we're not selling CDs, we're not selling downloads. Do you find as a producer in the studio, do you ever get tired of listening to you know, the same music over and over? I know my wife has followed me in the studio when we've worked on projects, and we would spend, you know, 4 or 5 hours just on drums. You know, this is a constant do, and she'd take a nap. You know, she'd fall asleep.
Right.
Because you are trying to get the best sound possible. Do you still enjoy that aspect of that really tiny minutia?
Yeah, I have to admit there are kind of like two sides of that for me.
Yeah.
I want to get the train rolling as quick as possible, but I don't sweat over a lot of the sounds as much as I used to going in. I mean, I was recording an upright bass player the other day, and he would breathe kind of loud, but lucky for me, he was breathing in time.
Oh.
Ba-doom, ba-boom, boom, ba-doom, ba-boom, boom. You know, I think, okay, I can leave that in. You know,
Yeah.
that's minutia.
But that's kind of cool. It gives it living, breathing type, you know.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. I have a friend who he has a monthly show. Vinny knows him too. And he has this show where he has on famous producers from Music Row, mostly country guys. And so I met one of them one time, and I said to Frank, who's does Miranda's records, Miranda Lambert, I said, "Hey, Frank, that was really a good interview you did." And we were talking about he's married to Leanne Womack, and Chuck Ainlay is his go-to engineer. And I admire Chuck, and he has Indiana ties. And I had the CD that they were referring to, and I said, and the song's called Fly, and I said, "So I guess you can't really unhear that then, can you?" And he stopped in his tracks, and he looked at me, he says, "What do you mean by that?"
Unhear
And I
that.
said, "You can't unhear it." And he goes, "Nobody's ever said that to me." And I thought, oh man, that's the way I live. I mean, once you hear something, like, that's the secret weapon of a mastering engineer, is that they don't have any baggage. There's no dog in this fight. They just, you know, are real honest about it. And so at the other end, like what you're talking about, the conceptual end, I try to make sure that everybody's comfortable and that everybody can interact in real time, and that we're going to take a group picture, you know, make sure that your hair's combed and you're not blinking, and there's not a shadow on your face or something. That's the way I look at it.
This is Bob Bender with Vinny Rebus, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to the business side of music.
So we're here in the studio with Steve Creech. It's got, I guess, maybe one more question for you here. You know, we've talked about the music business and how it's changed.
Yeah.
The future of recording and mastering. You know, we've touched on this in some other podcasts, and Vinny and I have, where, you know, used to be you had to go into the big studios either in L.A. or New York or Music Row in Nashville, and, you know, it was those studios, you know, would have massive budgets to go in and record, and now people are putting microphones in their bathrooms to, you know, and turning that into a vocal booth.
Yeah.
How, So first of all, you have the future of recording, and then you have the future of mastering.
Right.
Where do you see this going?
Well, you look at music in general today, the industry, like you alluded to earlier, has changed. There's a lot of social network things, like a lot of the structure that we took for granted is sort of gone, but the technology was supposed to fill that hole. And that was the promise.
Yeah.
That it'd be a democracy in a sense, that anybody can record high quality files. Well, to be honest, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there was a function that I think is missed. People demonize the record companies, but I also realized that they served a purpose. They did screen a lot of material. They did put a lot of energy behind people in their careers, nurture them, kind of like the MGM system back in the Hollywood days.
Right.
We wouldn't have a lot of those iconic movie stars. Or
You had contract players back then.
Yeah, exactly. And they had work. And I really admire some of the creative things, but I also realize that a lot of these folks don't have any guidance. And I feel totally blessed that I come up in the ranks of the transition period where I watched the technology. I was an analog guy working on tape machines and consoles, big consoles that would take half the room up. And then I work with kids, in their laptops and stuff like that. Music is music. But I find that there's a huge disconnect, and that's why I like to be an educator, and talk about things like that. We don't have time to get into a lot of details. But I would talk to them about the difference between loudness and volume, or make basic understandings of acoustics that they're in, or not to, like I mix records for other people, and they bring me files that are crushed and distorted, and they just don't know the basics. And that's kind of sad sometimes.
You brought up a perfect example. We mix today. Engineers so much and producers mix today for earbuds. We're not mixing for ears anymore.
Right.
And Harman, the electronics company, did a documentary a few years ago, and you can find it on YouTube, called "The Distortion of Sound," and it talks about exactly that, how we've compressed music into nothingness.
Loudness wars.
Yeah, and I love that the loudness. Versus the volume. It is a big difference, and if you don't know what you're doing or what to listen for, you don't know the difference.
Well, if I had one little bit of advice to people who are getting into recording and mastering, your ears are not linear, and you hear things different at different volumes. You hear different frequencies at different volumes.
In different atmospheres.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to Bell Labs in the 20s. Fletcher Munson contour curves is what I remember reading about. So you and I are sitting about 4 feet apart, maybe 5 feet apart. And in this casual conversation with Vinny, it's averaging somewhere around 75 decibels. I know that because I'm always clocking things. So I have a speed limit that I will mix at this volume and I will master at this volume. And OSHA, I'm concerned about these earbuds and the kids that use them, because OSHA says you can be exposed to 83 to 85 decibels for 8 hours with no damage to your hearing. But you jump up 5 dB and it cuts it to 4 hours. So since I'm in the trenches, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours sometimes with the bands, and they want to crank it, I come back to calibrated listening levels. And earbuds, they put the sound right in there, and a lot of young people are experiencing hearing loss at a very early age, and that's distressing to me. And so that was something that I wanted to start working on. I'm trying to find people to work with on that, not necessarily OSHA, but an awareness of it.
I think ear fatigue is crucial when you're in the studio, even at lower volumes. If you can't hear it clearly, you just need to take a break, step outside and go listen to birds or something.
I think it's also, it's important for musicians to understand that they really shouldn't be necessarily mixing and mastering their own stuff because of that ear fatigue.
Right,
they hear
exactly.
everything,
Yeah.
and they're so engrossed in it that they can't really make those little discernments in the sound and everything. Do you agree with that?
Oh, totally.
Yeah. I think musicians need to step away when it's time to mix and master. They've got to. They're too emotionally invested in that project, and like you said, the mix starts to creep.
Yeah, I guess that's the best way to put it. But Vinny made a good point. I have to admit that when I was young and naive, I just thought that everybody could be I have a healthy disconnect, and they knew when to stop a project, when it not just abandoned, but okay, this song is done, I've written it, or this song is recorded, I'm finished with it, I'm ready to go to mastering. And of course, back in the days when you had budgets, a lot of times that helped determine, okay,
Right.
Next. But I keep finding when people give me things, and I would just say, hey, what's that awful sound? And what's that clickety-clickety-click? Or what's that hum? Is that an air conditioner? Or is that a truck going by? And they would go, oh, we never noticed that, because they were in the studio working on it 3, 4, 5, 6 months, so they've lost their objectivity. And it's like trying to do your own homeschooling or your own dentistry or, home neutering kit for your dog or something, It's kind of crazy, really.
Does that explain why you don't have any dogs now?
Well, yeah, they ran away,
I have one more question. The difference between somebody mastering using $100 mastering software versus hiring someone to do the mastering. What do you bring to the table that the software can't do, or vice versa?
Tons of experience, mostly. Like I said before, I feel blessed that when I would come into work, and I'll try to be brief, I'd come into work at like 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I would say to Kirsten, who was my assistant, what am I doing today? And she'd say, well, you're going to work on this, this, and this, and like I said, these are not records that I didn't write the songs, right? But I would have a pretty full day. There would be a bluegrass record and some pop records and some jazz, and a lot of variety, and that kind of experience kept me from being emotional about it. I love passion, but I also know objectivity is what you bring to it. Also, I have I've been blessed to have a really nice room, like we were talking about earlier, where the room is calibrated. I know it real well. I have a lot of high-tech monitoring in it, and I constantly educate myself.
I think the key word here, you touched on it briefly earlier, is you bring the ears to not only the years of experience, but you bring the ears of experience to a session. And I think
ears of experience.
Ears
Bob
of experience.
Bender's got the term here.
Yeah, I'll get that copyrighted tomorrow.
I like it.
Yeah. So how can people reach you?
Well, we're revamping the website at the moment, but you can find me. Sound Investment Recording is here in Indianapolis and in Nashville. Email address.
That's always good.
Yeah, it's sirstudio@me.com, which is SIRSTUDIO, sirstudio@me.com, and the SIR stands for Sound Investment Recording.
Very good. Steve, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Vinny.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Bob.
Wealth of information.
Great time. Thank you.
Good that we got to know you. Vinny, always a pleasure.
Same here.
Great. This is Bob Bender and Vinny Ribas. You've been listening to The Business Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender for Bob Bender Productions. Co-producer for the show is Vinny Ribas. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.